right. Well, first off, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming to Louisiana's Old State Capitol. We are a Secretary of State museum, and it's part of our mission to preserve Louisiana's rich history in the democratic process. This month is part of September's Hispanic Heritage Celebration. We are welcoming back our speaker. He is going to be giving his second half of his 2 talks on Spanish governors here in Louisiana, Robert Gray Freeland. He holds a Bachelor of Arts from Tulane University in Economics and Latin American Studies. He retired from the American Express Company after a 30-year career in Latin America and the Caribbean. And he has lived in New Orleans since 2008 and has served as a volunteer with various organizations and museums around the state of Louisiana, specializing in Louisiana's connections to the Spanish-speaking world. He also happens to be fluent in 3 different languages: English, Portuguese, and Spanish. And again, my name is Ashley Chaptaw. I'm the education curator here. And thank you all so much for joining us. And please make sure to also follow us on Facebook to stay in the loop for all of our upcoming events. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn things over to Mr. Freeland. And you can take this off if you want to carry it.
What I'm going to do is, let's see if and so where are you guys from? Houston. You here for the football game? Okay. So if I can't use this, I'm going to have to go. It's not working this time. Did I move it or did you move it? Perfect. So I'm going to put this down. It's something weird. The closer I get to the monitor, it changes. The more distant, it doesn't do it. We couldn't figure out. So what I'm going to do is I'll stand over here so we can look. I'm going to talk about Louisiana's Spanish heritage. The assumption is we are different because of our French heritage, which is true, but Spain also had an impact. And the second thing, last week I spoke about the first 4 governors. Today I'm speaking on the second 5, but I will overlap the beginning and how we became Spanish. And then the other thing that we can't see right there is something known as the Black Legend, and it's not from Africa. It is simply that the English looked down on the Spaniards, and anything Spain did was considered negative. And it is sort of translated into France looking down on the Spanish as well. And then as Americans, anything that the Spanish-speaking world does, it's part of our heritage. And then Latin America declared independence from Spain. So on top of it, the children of Spain, if you will, also look down on the mother country. So Spain has a problem different than other countries. Okay? You can change it. Louisiana has always been an important part of contact between the U.S. and the Spanish-speaking world. What is one of the largest companies in Baton Rouge? Community Coffee. Where do they get their products from? The rest of the world, not here. They produce it here. And that's an example of what Louisiana could do much better, is receive things, industrialize it here, and then sell it to the rest of the world, right? And another myth is that after 1803 in the Louisiana Purchase, Spain left completely. And I'm going to try to show you that we're still connected. And we have had mayors of New Orleans more specifically than here, like Chet Morrison from 1946 to 1961. He actually reconnected the port of New Orleans in a way. He took it from like 15th largest in the nation to 2nd, simply by reconnecting to Latin America. Next. And this book, The Beautiful Crescent, is what all tour guides in New Orleans have to read. And the section on Spain says Spain was never Spanish-speaking until the Cubans arrived after Fidel Castro. And they've discounted then the whole history. It's now changed, so tour guides now do learn the better history. And the other thing that's interesting is, where does Louisiana's 40 years of being Spain fall? If I wanted to study it and I go to a university, and so where do I go? It's Spain, it's got to be European history department. After the classics, France, England, Spain is fourth or fifth of the countries of importance. So you go to the Spanish professor, what's he say? Oh no, you're talking about Louisiana? That's when it was part of the Viceroyalty of New Spain. You have to go to the Latin American Studies department. You go to Latin American Studies and say, I want to talk about Spanish Louisiana. Oh no, that's US history. You go to the US history department. He says, oh no, Louisiana is too complicated. You have to go to the Louisiana history department. So this little piece of the world for 40 years is part of 4 different history departments. What an amazing story. So what we're trying to do with this is, rather than losing it as a least important part of 4 different history departments, Louisiana has one of the most interesting histories of any state, of any country, because we were part of all of this. Next page. And so what I try to do is, are our histories different, similar, or the same? And I had to start this out a couple of years ago with Spanish teachers, because they were interested. And here's the kicker, going back to the Black legend. If the Spanish teacher is from Spain, they want to learn about Spanish Louisiana's heritage. If they're from Peru or Mexico, they don't care about Spain. So it's again, my experience in setting up field trips, talking to teachers, has been very different. Next page. And this to me is what's going to change Louisiana into the future. And you're a retired teacher. I don't know if what your colleagues are saying. This new book came out. This is the history book. I'll let you look at it. So next page. There. This, no, sorry. Go back one, sorry. So here, in the old days, you taught Louisiana history 4th grade, and then 8th grade, 5th grade was another thing. What they've done, let's look at 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. It's Louisiana, the United States, and the world, all at the same time, but from the beginning of history to George Washington. From George Washington in 7th grade to Reconstruction, and then from Reconstruction to the modern period in 8th grade. So kids now are learning that history is not disconnected one from the other, but it's actually part of a continuum. And I don't know what the curriculum's like in science and math and all that. What I'm saying is, social studies and history with this new curriculum, it makes Louisiana history so much easier to teach, and it's a great history. Next page. My focus for one organization is the Battle of Baton Rouge during the American Revolution under Bernardo de Galvez, the 4th Spanish governor. We are sitting in 1779. What country is this? So let's say 1778. What country are we in? Huh? No, this is England. Now, you look across the river, that's West Baton Rouge. What country was that? That was Spain. New Orleans is Spain. Mandeville, Covington is England. So this new curriculum talks about Bernardo de Galvez, the Battle of Lake Pontchartrain, the Battle of Baton Rouge. Had you ever heard of the Battle of Lake Pontchartrain? Until this year, no one's even heard of it. Yet this Wednesday, the 10th of September, the mayor of Mandeville read a proclamation to an audience celebrating the Battle of Lake Pontchartrain. And in Spain, the mayor of Macharavillaya also read a proclamation in the city where Bernardo de Galvez was born. So what's beginning to happen is Louisiana is reconnecting in different ways. Next. We tend to focus on what we did over here. Those 4 books on the top are a good read if you want to learn about Louisiana's Spanish heritage. And what happened down below, that recovered memories, right? A bad word in classes in history right now is rewriting history. The exhibit in 2018 was called Recovered Memories. It's not rewriting history. It's what happened actually happened. We're recovering the lost memories in Louisiana. And the museum exhibit taught us the Spanish way of looking at things. Next page. We are part of the Virreinato de Nueva España. Next. Spain also had Peru and South America. Next. As the colonial empire grew, they broke away Colombia. Next. And then at the end of the American Revolution, or the beginning, the Virreinato of Rio de la Plata was developed. Next. Spain had a very organized form of colonial government. The 13 colonies were each one independent, reported into England. The French, where was Louisiana? It was disastrous. We went from crown colony, we really didn't know what to do with us. Next. These positions were very clear. Next. That building still exists. It's in New Orleans. It's called the Cabildo, and that was the seat of government. Next. And then the US dollar in today's economy mirrors what Spain's money was like back then. So as Spain gets the Americas, they had gold and silver. Next. The coin to the left circulated in Portuguese countries. It's a Spanish coin with the seal of Portugal. And the coin to the right, it's a British coin, Spanish coin sealed, stamped with the seal of England. That's how important it was. Next. So when Thomas Jefferson is designated by George Washington to create the US currency, he bases the US currency, the $1 equals the 8 reais, the piece of 8 of Spain. Next. And still today in Louisiana, we utilize terminology. The 2 bits equals 1/4 of a dollar. So 2 bits is 2 reais. And then there was a newspaper in New Orleans called the Times-Picayune that the cost was medio real, which was 6 1/4 cents. And the nickname for the coin was the Picayune. And so in the United States, we allowed Spanish coinage to circulate until 1857. So yes, Spain left in 1803 with the Louisiana Purchase, but we were still using Spanish money that late. Next. I'm going to go into the histories of England, Spain, and France, and they change over time. In the 1500s, Spain and England tried to have relations through alliances. So Henry VIII marries Catherine of Aragon. Their daughter, Mary Tudor, is Queen Mary she marries the Spanish king, Philip II. The marriages don't really work out. The children, Mary Tudor dies, and so Spain and England now become enemies rather than attempts at marriage. Next. In the 1600s, Spain loses. France takes Canada, Haiti, Martinique, Guadeloupe from Spain, and England founds the 13 colonies and takes Jamaica, Bahamas, and Barbados, beginning to control the Caribbean. De La Salle comes down the Mississippi River from French Canada, declares the Mississippi and all of its tributaries as part of France. Next. And the 1700s begin, and it's technically 115 years of open warfare between the 3 countries, but they switch. If you look at the Napoleonic Wars, it's now England and Spain against France, whereas the first 3 sessions, it's France and Spain against England. Next. And New Orleans and Baton Rouge are part of this story at each level. We're not at the margin. We are part of the trading pieces. And after the 7 Years' War, we become Spanish for the second time in our history. Next. And this is what the country, the region looks like after. And one of the things I will point out, if you look at Central America, you see some green there. England was beginning to take away parts of Central America as well. Next. And when we become Spanish the second time, our king is Charles III, King of Spain, Carlos III. St. Charles Avenue in New Orleans is named after him. We really don't realize that our main avenue in New Orleans is named after a Spanish king. Now, he is a Bourbon king. He was the great-grandson of Louis XIV. Next. And one of the things he is famous for in Spanish history is he implemented the Bourbon reforms. So the Spanish Empire was falling in importance for a series of reasons. And he comes in, he changes it, he organizes it. He invested in libraries. So even our Cabildo here had the same system when we become Spanish. And he modernized all of Spain, including its Latin American colonies, in terms of manufacturing and technology. Next. And two of the most important men in implementing the Bourbon reforms, not only in Louisiana, but throughout the Spanish Empire, was José de Galvez, Bernardo de Galvez's uncle, and Alejandro O'Reilly, Louisiana's second governor. And so to my Louisiana history teacher here, when I say Alejandro O'Reilly, what do you remember about him? More, she says a carpetbagger, and his nickname is Bloody O'Reilly because he executed 5 Frenchmen. But he is actually a great man in Spanish history. Next. This is José de Galvez. He dies in 1787, so up until then, he is still commanding Louisiana. Next. And this is an org chart put out by Gilbert Dinn. And so you see the governor of Louisiana reports to the captain general in Cuba, who reports to the viceroy in New Spain, who at the time Bernardo was governor. That was his father, who reports to his uncle, who reports to the king. So what I'm showing you in this page is that everything that was going on in Louisiana was known to the king. This was not like under the French, a little backwater that they didn't know what to do with us. This was one of the most strategic locations that Spain had at the time. Next. What is Spanish Louisiana? They bring people from Spain, they bring people from the Canary Islands, and most Cajuns come to Louisiana in the Spanish period. So after the 7 Years' War, Acadie, Nova Scotia today, they were evicted by the British. Who wanted them? France didn't want them. England didn't want them. The 13 colonies didn't want them. Spanish Louisiana said they can come here. They're not going to live in the city. We're going to put them in the interior. And so I'm going to talk about the opera. Jambalaya is a Spanish origin dish. Not a French, not an African, not an English, not an Italian. Next. The Native American population of Louisiana had already been decimated by the arrival of the French, not through wars, but really disease. And Spain comes in, they had experience dealing with the civilizations of the Mayas, the Aztecs, the Incas. And so they had a process in place. And technically, if you were a Catholic, you were a citizen. And so like the missions you always see, San Antonio, San Francisco, Spain wanted to Catholicize anybody. And once you were Catholic, slave, indigenous, or European, you were considered a citizen. Next. Our African heritage in Louisiana is very different. In the French period, we brought enslaved Africans from the Senegambian region. In the Spanish period, Spain did not have colonies in Africa. They allowed the Portuguese and British to bring enslaved Africans from their cultures. And so in the American mind, Africa is a continent. That's where they came from. In today's world, we know the 4 countries most of them came from. But if you drill down even further, each one of those cultures contributed in a way different than the others. Next. Manumission under the US and England was prohibited. Once a slave, you could not be freed. There were major exceptions. So someone like Thomas Jefferson, that famous Sally Heming, eventually she was freed, but it was almost impossible for him to do it. France permitted the manumission of slaves, whereas Spain had a system where it was encouraged. So if you're a Catholic on Sunday, slave or white, you were free. Because you went to church, you had to learn how to read the Bible, And at the end of church, what did you do? You went and made money. And what did you do with the money? Under Spanish law, you could purchase your freedom. So in Spanish Louisiana, we now have whites, enslaved blacks, and we have a second category or a third category, the free people of color. Next. And this creates a different dynamic in race relations that Spain had, different than France, different than the Americans, although eventually all of us have the same system. And so the upper right hand, that would be Barack Obama. His mother was white, his father was black, therefore he is a mulatto, he is not black. He has a different designation as an example. White with Indian, mestizo. Next page. So the Spanish system was very complicated because they ended up with as many, this one here is 16 different categories. And that's the mindset of Spain, of Spanish Louisiana. Next. We settled the Acadians and the German coast with people from Europe. Galveston and Valenzuela were mostly Canary Islanders. St. Bernard and Barataria also. And then New Iberia was founded in 1779 with people from Malaga in Spain. Next. There was a regiment of Louisiana. It served as far north as Illinois. There was one battalion. Next. And Galvez was authorized in his governorship, the 4th, to create a second battalion. The first battalion were people from the mainland. The second battalion, his father was a high official before being promoted to Mexico in the Canary Islands, and he recruited the 700 men to come to Louisiana. Upon arrival in Louisiana, 150 were single men. You go into the Regiment of Louisiana, your career military. The 550 that were married, we give you land and you serve in the militia. And so the fixed discipline militia of the Spanish, every man between 15 and 50 had to serve in the military, and your maneuvers were done in conjunction with the Regiment of Louisiana. Next. This is the 3 battles that Bernardo de Galvez won. We've already passed this in today's presentation. Next. And so now we're going into the governors. So all the governors, all 9 of them, were good appointees. This was not a province where you punish someone and sent them to Louisiana. And that's one of the main things I want to do with Ashley and the 9 governors that you have. What is it? You said 57 in total? Total, whatever the number of governors from Bienville all the way to the present day, 9 of them are from Spain. The way we teach history in Louisiana is the guy came here from here and he went there, and we don't care about him before or after. So what I'm going to try to do in today's presentation is they weren't unconnected one to the other. There was a reason for them coming here, and when they left, there was a reason for where they went. A couple of them married into local girls, so they integrated themselves into society. And all of them went on to better positions in Spain's government. Next. These were the 4 that I spoke about last week. First one, Ulloa. Second one, O'Reilly. Third one, Unzaga. Fourth one, Galvez. Next. And when Miro, the 5th Spanish governor, takes over, this is the map of what it looked like. And I want one thing that's special is look at Florida. It's part of Louisiana. The second part, that green, the panhandle at that time was much wider. And so places like Natchez, Mississippi were part of Louisiana through the Florida connection. Now, what is happening in these last 5 governors is the United States is growing and moving more and more towards its west. They begin using the Mississippi more and more for shipping essential goods and receiving essential goods. And that begins to create problems now between Spain and the United States. Next. Miro was the 5th Spanish governor. He was born in Catalonia in 1744. He had served in various fronts. And when he was here, he wrote a description of Louisiana that the Spanish government, in other words, he was not only a military man, he knew how to document the importance of the colony, and it is used to solidify his governorship. Next. So he was the longest one. He married a local girl, Celeste McCarty. He tried to promote immigration, and it began working in the beginning. And then he starts having trouble with his own. Père Antoine was the Spanish St. Louis Cathedral priest. He wanted them to bring in the Inquisition to Louisiana. And Miro said, there's no way, and it's actually sort of a funny story. Père Antoine had asked for police to help him round up sinners. And one day the military show up at his, and he's thinking it's extra help for him. And they said, no, we're taking you to the ship and you're expelled from the colony because there's no way we're going to have the Inquisition in Louisiana. He actually comes back later. In New Orleans history, Miro is very important because the fire of 1788 destroyed most of the city. Miro rebuilt. Next. We do have a Miro Street in New Orleans. And he is, after Louisiana, he's promoted to field marshal. And what happens after the French Revolution in 1789, France and Spain that had been Bourbon monarchies together are now enemies of one another. And so the French, as they start expanding, they attack Spain, and Miro actually dies from natural causes. He was an older man. So you see he was promoted after Louisiana. Next. The sixth Spanish governor, Francisco Hector Baron de Carondelet, was born in Flanders, which was part of the Netherlands, the lower countries. He had fought under O'Reilly. He fought under Galvez in Pensacola in 1781. He is then sent to San Salvador for a couple of years, and he is known down there for making many improvements. So he was not a scientist in the sense that the first Spanish governor was, but he was highly organized. Next. So he comes to New Orleans in 1792, and he gets credit for starting the first theater, the first newspaper. He instituted gas lamps, canals, forts, and he started adding cities and sugar as an economy, as an economic factor. Next. And one of the most important things that he does that are still kept here is New Orleans was the first opera house in the United States, and it was under Carondelet. Now that opera is, how many of you go to the opera consistently here? Only Ashley. Go back in time, 1790s, you're Spanish Louisiana. Opera is the only thing happening. Who can go to the opera? Even the slaves could, because Spanish Louisiana, now you got the nosebleed seats, but the opera was open to everyone. Who were the musicians? Could have been a slave, could have been black, could have been white. So what you have in New Orleans, very unique, is everybody, rich and poor, slave or free, is listening to the same music. And that is, in a way, why still today in New Orleans, we all basically listen to the same music. Now, most of you are from Baton Rouge. I do field trips at the museum in New Orleans, and do you know who Irma Thomas is? Most kids from Destrehan Plantation upriver, they don't know who Irma Thomas is. From Destrehan down, they do know. And so there are clear differences in the state of Louisiana as to what type of music and which musicians you know. And New Orleans is very different, and it comes from this Spanish influence from the opera. Next. Carondelet gets promoted to Quito, Ecuador. He continues making improvements, and the White House of Ecuador is called the Palacio Carondelet because he built that in the 1790s. And so that is the impact of our sixth Spanish governor elsewhere. Next. The seventh one is Gayoso de Lemos. He's from Portugal. He had fought with Miro and Cadiz with O'Reilly. He was the governor in Natchez. He spoke English, and Natchez at the time was really, this is before it transfers to the US. You had to speak English there. Next. He improved infrastructure here. He gets credit for starting state-run garbage collection. And as a New Orleanian, that to anyone else, it sounds like a joke, but to us in New Orleans, one of our biggest problems is the garbage pickup. And he was the one that, unfortunately for him, he had to evacuate the Spaniards out of Natchez after that expanded panhandle got transferred to the U.S. And he actually died in New Orleans, is buried in St. Louis Cathedral. Next. Casa Calvo. So Ashley, this is the portrait that is attributed as being Casa Calvo. And in Ashley's museum, we only have a silhouette because the only known portrait of Casa Calvo, it's not really for sure that he's it. So that's like a project in work. Do we validate so that Ashley, instead of having a silhouette a couple of years from now, we'll be able to see what Casa Calvo looked like? He fought under Galvez in 3 battles. Next. And he was designated for delivery. So he leaves in 1801. The purchase happens in 1803. He is actually brought back, and he gets in trouble with Governor Claiborne and is expelled. He then goes back to Europe. When Napoleon takes over Spain, Casa Calvo becomes a traitor to Spain, fights under Napoleon, for Napoleon, and he actually dies in France. Next. And the last one, Salcedo. Not much is known about him. He's at the end of the period. He prohibited the Americans from using the port for a while. That created all types of problems for Spain, which triggers the French, the Louisiana Purchase. Next. What I'm going to do in this, so we're done with the governors. Not as exciting as the first 4, but they did have an impact on Louisiana, and I want to show it in the people, the Spaniards that were part of New Orleans. So Gilbert Antoine de Saint-Maxent was a Frenchman who became a Spanish. He wasn't one of the 5 that got executed because he accepted the new government. Next. What he did do was he had 4 girls and he married them all into Spanish officials. So the 3rd Spanish governor, Gonzaga, married one of them. Galvez married one of them. And the other 2 girls married into Spanish officials who ended their careers dying in the War of Independence. Next. Andrés Almonte Rojas was a Spaniard that had come in with O'Reilly. He rebuilt the Cabildo. He rebuilt the cathedral. He built hospitals. And more importantly, in New Orleans history, he's the father of Micaela. Next. This is his daughter, Micaela de Pontalba. Now, Micaela Almonte de Pontalba married a French baron. In history, we consider her a French baroness, but she was a Spanish girl. And so we lose connections with our French Spaniards, and that's why I wanted to focus on her. Next. Père Antoine. This is the guy that got kicked out by Miro for trying to bring the Inquisition. In New Orleans history, we know him as Père Antoine. That's a French name. But his name was actually Antonio de Sedella. He also was a Spaniard. Next. Salazar was a painter. In the history of Latin America, only 2 places had great portrait painters. One was Puerto Rico with a man named Campeche. The other was New Orleans, Salazar. Whereas in the rest of the Americas, only the real wealthy and high positioned could pay for a portrait painter. Salazar was so good, he needed to make money, he painted everybody. And so we have depictions of New Orleanians, unlike the rest of Latin America. Next. Francisco de Boligny got here early on with O'Reilly, and he remained all the way, as you can see, to 1800. Next. He founded New Iberia in 1779. Also, like Miro, he wrote a document, a treatise on the importance of Louisiana. So these guys weren't just administrators. They actually knew how to document the strategic importance of the colony. And he fought under Galvez in all 3 major battles. Next. He continued in government. And, to Ashley, he was an interim governor. So does that make it 10? Do we stick to the 9? And the reason I'm bringing it up with Ashley, we have a problem. If you go to Wikipedia, they keep on adding numbers. So Galvez is the fourth Spanish governor. We know that, but in Wikipedia it says the fifth because they're counting the last French governor who was a holdover as the first Spanish governor. And I think what's happened is they've put Bouligny as an extra. So now there's 11 Spanish governors in Wikipedia. And I'll tell you what the problem is. I can talk to all you adults and say Galvez is the fourth, and some diligent kid in class is going to say, no, you're wrong, he's the fifth. Because I looked at Wikipedia, and Wikipedia tells me he's the fifth. Do I want to argue with a kid in the classroom? No, I've got to work with Ashley. We got to correct Wikipedia somehow. Or we go with what Wikipedia says. And here's a question to Paul. Is there a history of the fixed regiment of Louisiana? Is there one book? Because what happens is Paul and I focus on the Galvez era. But here, Bouligny was the commander from 1791 to 1797. It was still here. And so, right? So that would be like a project after these sessions that we're partnering with the old state capitol. You know, how do we make sure that someone does eventually write a definitive history of a regiment from Louisiana that served as far north as Chicago, defended St. Louis? And we think of the Louisiana as the end of our borders today with Arkansas and Mississippi, but Louisiana back then and the regiment of Louisiana had a much greater role. Next. Pierre-Georges Rousseau was a Frenchman. Born in France, his mother died when he was young. His father was a ship captain. It was easier for the father to keep him with relatives in the Carolinas. And then in 1779, Washington says, you are now assigned to Spain in New Orleans. Go work under Galvez. In the Battle of Lake Pontchartrain, he was the second in command. Next. And he continues in New Orleans after. So the Galvez period is over. But Rousseau continued serving under all the governors. As the Americans came in, there were more piracy, not because of the American, but simply the population grew. And so he took over the Spanish Navy, which today parallels the 8th District of the U.S. Coast Guard, right? Because back then, Spain had a navy elsewhere. What Rousseau was commanding was the Gulf and the Mississippi River. Next. He marries a wealthy woman in New Orleans, had 12 children with her. And if you know New Orleans, his plantation went from the river beyond St. Charles Avenue between Jackson and Louisiana Avenues. So it's easy to understand why he didn't go back to Spain to live on a military pension when that was his plantation. He dies in 1810. And when General Lafayette visited New Orleans in 1825, the widow Rousseau was one of the people Lafayette actually in his 5 days went and visited personally. Next. Paul, you want to stand up and tell us about him? Here's a descendant of Julie Barbeau.
Yes, this is an interesting figure here. He was born in a place called Los Adeas. Los Adeas is between Natchitoches, Louisiana, and the Sabine River. And that's when Texas actually had its border or boundary in really into this part of modern Louisiana. And his parents were from let's see, from Andalusia, Spain. And they were married in the Alamo when the Alamo was a church mission. So Antonio rose through the ranks and became Captain General of that part of Texas when it was in Louisiana. I've learned so much going to family reunion. There were 600. Yeah. There were 600 people registered for this family reunion. 300 showed up. So I'm the one in the black hat. Yeah, you're circling around me. That's me back in there. So anyway, he founded Nacogdoches, Texas. He had to because the king of Spain got upset because the Spanish at Los Ideas were trading with the French, and they were shortcutting Spanish taxes, and it was just a situation that was messy because Spain had to wait for supplies to come from Veracruz. The Los Ideans had to wait for supplies to come from Veracruz forever and ever and ever. They didn't have Amazon to deliver. So the French acted like Amazon, and the Spain didn't like that. So they told them, get out of Los Ideas, go back across the Sabine River. And that's when he founded Nacogdoches, Texas. And his policy was always to try to make things better for the people under him. And he tried to establish good relations with the Native Americans too, to the extent that he exhausted all his personal resources. And then the rumor started, he was cattle rustling to supply the Native Americans. So he spent the rest of his life trying to clear his name, but eventually he ended up donating 900 head of cattle to the Galvez cattle drive. Governor Galvez said, I need supplies for my regiment. And so they got all the what's my word? All the cattle ranchers, the rancheros, to donate cattle for this cattle drive. It started in San Antonio. It went through Goliad, Texas, to Nacogdoches, and Antonio Guilibarbo had a ranch called Lobonia, and it donated cattle in the drive. It crosses the Sabine River to Natchitoches, Louisiana, then goes down to Opelousas, and then the herd gets split. Some of it goes on to New Orleans. The rest of it gets processed, loaded up, the cowhide, the leather, and all those products loaded up are transported up the Mississippi River to Fort San Carlos. I hope you got a slide of the next guy too. No? Okay. Anyway, so the supplies go to Fort San Carlos. George Rogers Clark gets those supplies, brings them to the Continental Army so they don't have a third and fourth Valley Forge. So how do we know this? Patrick Henry, governor of Virginia, writes Bernardo de Galvez a thank you letter. That is documented. And that's how Galvez got his honorary U.S. citizenship. And my ancestor did a little bit and helped in that process.
Thanks, Paul. So, that's where you graduated from? So actually, one of the reasons I brought in Ibarbo, Paul helped me out with it, obviously, is when I do the program, the field trips for Spanish classes, and I speak to Spanish teachers in the state of Louisiana. Some of these meetings, they're from all 64 parishes. The ones in Northwest Louisiana say you're focused on New Orleans too much. We had a different Spanish history. And so Paul has enabled me to actually include in my presentations now, bring in Northwest Louisiana into the Spanish story. Next. This is an idiot king. Charles III, his father was fantastic. The son was an idiot. He was ineffective. He gave Louisiana to Napoleon. Next. We're now American. This is the Louisiana Purchase. Next. 1803, we were only French for 20 days. People think it was much longer, but it wasn't. Next. Jorge Farragut was a Spanish officer in the Navy of South Carolina. Each colony had their own. And he is sent here by Claiborne because he spoke Spanish. Now New Orleans is American. Do you know anybody with that last name, Farragut, in American history? The David Farragut was the son. So the American Navy claims David Farragut is the first Hispanic admiral in the history, and it's this connection to Spanish Louisiana that became American. Next. Paul Morphy, parents were Spaniards. He remained in New Orleans, and he becomes one of the first worldwide chess players. So a Spanish New Orleanian in the 1800s is the best chess player in the world. Next. And what was happening in Latin America? Next. Charles IV again, he abdicates to Napoleon. Next. His son Ferdinand becomes king and then is forced to abdicate. Next. And Joseph Napoleon is Napoleon's brother. He now becomes king of Spain, a Frenchman. Imagine that. Next. And what's happening in Latin America, they know that the United States is independent. France has had its revolution. The Haitians have declared independence, and England is promoting Latin America to become independent against Spain. Next. This timeline shows you when the different parts of Latin America became independent. And I put West Florida in there. Next. Now, I will say there is a connection between Galvez, the fourth Spanish governor, and Latin American independence. In 1781, 1780, the Spanish king asks for money. They're called donativos, donations. And the money is to be donated to send to Galvez to defeat the British in Louisiana. And the Mexicans and the Cubans gave it willingly. In Malaga, Spain, they gave it willingly, so much so that the cathedral, they never built the second spire. But in Peru, it triggered the equivalent of the American Tea Party. Next. In Colombia, the same thing. They refused to pay the taxes. And Manuela Beltran gets credit for starting independence movements in Colombia. Next. Now, I have a question for you guys. Do you think that in New Orleans of 1806, 9,000 population, would Rousseau and Farragut, two naval officers that fought in the American Revolution, would they have known each other? Of course they would have, right? Both wealthy, both connected. Next. Would they have influenced young captains, ship's captains? I believe they would have. They would have been telling war stories, asking questions. Next. Jean and Pierre Lafitte. Jean's born roughly 1782. We don't know where, but we know more or less. Next. Here's his obituary. He was fighting Spain. So born a Spaniard, but now he's fighting Spain, and he dies off the coast of Honduras. Next. Renato Belush, born in 1780, served under Lafitte in New Orleans as one of the Baratarians, served under Andrew Jackson. Next. Battery number 3 under Jackson, the last line there. And next, he's now buried next to Simon Bolivar in the Pantheon of Heroes in Caracas. So a Spaniard becomes an American, becomes a Venezuelan. It's all part of the same story. So yes, Spain left technically in 1803, but we were still connected in Louisiana in a very important way. Next. And this is an amazing man. He was born in, see this guy, Paul, he served in the Regiment of Louisiana also. He was born in 1788 in New Orleans. He dies at an old age. And he's considered the father of Ecuador's Navy. Next. West Florida. So in 1778, we're sitting right now in England. 1779, a year later after Galvez, we're sitting in Spain. In 1803, New Orleans becomes part of the United States. Baton Rouge is still part of Spain. In 1810, when the rest of Latin America declares independence, West Baton Rouge also does. Next. This is and Ashley, this is like a difficult thing to figure out. Is he really a governor of Louisiana? He was the governor of West Florida. Where do we consider him? And actually, when the revolt happened, he was already being tried in Havana because he had let things get out of hand here. And the other thing that's interesting is Gran had a white family, and he had a mistress. And that's the one that apparently is the Pope's family. So that is a new connection between, and I don't know if you all have been following that the new Pope, first American Pope, one of the historians at HNOC did some research and popped up that, yeah, his connections are to New Orleans. This has to be better analyzed. Next. West Florida becomes a country. Next. And Mobile goes to Alabama, Gulfport and Biloxi go to Mississippi, and the next page is the Florida parishes. So now you know the story behind the West Florida Rebellion, part of Latin American history, and the Florida parishes. Next. The Haitian Revolution. What is the connection with us? The Haitian slaves kick out all the free people of color and the whites. Many of them go to Santiago, Cuba. In 1808, when Napoleon invades the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Cuba have a problem. We got all these French-speaking people. Are they going to side with Napoleon or are they going to side with Spain? Better get rid of them. Who takes them in? In 1809, the population of New Orleans more than doubles, with people fleeing Haiti, 1/3 white, 1/3 free people of color, 1/3 enslaved Haitians. So again, we're still part of Spain, even though the purchase happened. Next. Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico are still Spanish. We have relations with them. Next. We always think of the Underground Railroad as Harriet Tubman taking them to Canada. But there were abolitionists in Cuba, even though Cuba still had slavery. And the captains knew, pick up the slave from New Orleans, take them to Havana, they're free. Now, the Mexicans also were part of it. They allowed the slaves in because Mexico's law said no more slavery. Cuba still had it, but they had a law that if you were a slave from the US, you got your freedom. Did they do that out of the kindness of their heart? No. What the Underground Railroad does with the proximity to Cuba and Mexico is the southern planters never knew when their slave was going to revolt and escape. That escape process destabilized the southern part of the United States. Next. We are still part of the United States. We are New Orleans. Narciso Lopez is trying to make Cuba independent. He uses New Orleans as his base. Next. Jose Marti, Cuba's greatest hero, never lived in New Orleans, but he did visit New Orleans in the 1880s. Next. And so in New Orleans, we have a statue of Jose Marti, and in the middle, you see the Cuban flag. Everybody knows the Cuban flag? The Betsy Ross of Cuba was living in New Orleans in the 1840s. So are we part of Spanish history in 1840? Yes, we still are. We didn't lose our connections back then. Next. This book talks about our heritage. Next. Words like the state of Louisiana is actually a mixture of French, Spanish, and we anglicized it the way we spell it today. Next. Creole comes from Portuguese to Spanish to French, and we still use it. Next. And I don't know, do you guys in Baton Rouge use Langap? You do. It's a Quechua word that was brought here under Ulloa, the first Spanish governor. Next. The first Spanish newspaper in the United States was 1808 in New Orleans. So yes, we are now American, but we still had Spanish newspapers. Next. St. Bernard Parish is in honor of Bernardo de Galvez. Next. Galvez Plaza. So when y'all leave the museum, cross the street over there, you have the Marcha de Galvez mural, and you can read about Galvez. Remember, that was last week's presentation. Next. Next. That's what you'll see outside. Next. Spanish Town is a neighborhood just beyond Capitol Park. It was founded in 1805. When the Spaniards that lived on that side of the river after the Louisiana Purchase They did not want to be Americans because after the Louisiana Purchase, this is Spain that now becomes the United States. So they move across the river and Carlos Gran gives them that area. Next. There are parts of when the Americans take it after 1810, it becomes a military fortification. Next. New Orleans has various streets with the names of the governors. Next. We have Spanish Plaza. Next. In the French Quarter, there's a myth that the French Quarter really is Spanish. It's not really Spanish either. Of the 900 buildings, 1 is French, 38 are Spanish. The French had laid it out. It burned down in 1788, 1794. The Spanish rebuild, but in essence, the French Quarter is a mixture of France, Spain, and the United States. Next. This is the fire of 1788. Next. Jackson Square, the way we describe it as tour guides. Jackson Square honors an American president in the French Quarter surrounded by buildings built by Spaniards. And that typifies Louisiana in a beautiful way. Nowhere else can you say the same thing, that the most iconic site that the rest of the world knows is actually a mixture of cultures. Next. The French market was actually built in the Spanish period. Next. There are Spanish buildings throughout. Next. I'm going fast on now. So there are organizations that still honor Spain and Louisiana. Next. Sociedad Española is completing 50 years this year. They are based mostly in New Orleans. Next. In New Iberia, and I was telling you all about, or was it you or we began talking about New Iberia. About 15 years ago, 16 years ago, a historian in Ayaurín de la Torre, a little city in Malaga, realizes that people from Ayaurín were taken to settle New Iberia. So he starts writing letters in Spanish to the mayor's office. Mayor, secretary, don't speak Spanish. Throw the letters out, throw the letters out. Finally, one day, the wife of the publisher of the local newspaper, she spoke Spanish. She's in the mayor's office, and they said, by the way, can you help us? What are these people trying to tell us? He said, oh, that's the historian from Ayaurín de la Torre telling us that we were founded by people from Malaga. What are you talking about? We're all Cajuns here. Turns out, no. Some of them are Cajuns, but a lot of them are Spaniards. And so the Spaniard says, I'm going to come over there next year. And you got, so 12, 13 years ago now, and we're talking recent history. He comes over with another city councilman, and they donate 12 flamenco dresses to the women of New Iberia. And they recommend you should have a festival. So 11 years ago, New Iberia did have, or 13 years ago, did have its first festival. The historian, now a city councilman, comes back in 2023, and he says, wow, one of the women's still wearing the dress. So he goes back to the mayor and says, we got to go back there next year. And they donated 75 dresses, flamenco dresses, to the women of New Iberia last year. And what they did was they brought the mayor and 18 people, a bunch of people from New Iberia went to Ayaurín de la Torre. So in a month period, they had an interchange, 18 from New Iberia in Spain, 18 from Spain, including the mayor. And they donated the dresses, girls, older women, fat women, skinny women. They brought 75. And on the stage, the women from Ayaurín taught the women from New Iberia how to dance. The dance that had they remained in Spain, they would have learned. And so it's, Paul and I have been going to observe this dynamic reawakening of the relations. Next. Los Isleños in St. Bernard have a festival every year. Next. Fantastic museum. Next. They bring Canary Islanders every year. The two young people over here are actually from St. Bernard. Next. And then organizations like the Daughters and Sons of the American Revolution just completed 100 years in April of 2025, that troops that fought under Galvez can join the Daughters and Sons of the American Revolution. So it's not just those that fought under Washington. Next. There are organizations like the Regiment of Louisiana, which are reenactors. And then there's another organization, the Granadeiros y Damas de Galvez. And Paul is unique. He's a member of all three because he joined the Granaderos, helped found the Louisiana chapter. His wife is the present governor. He's a descendant of Ibarbo plus a whole bunch of others. And so he's SAR, and he's a serious reenactor with the Regiment of Louisiana. So which one of the three are you guys going to join? That's why we're here today, right, Ashley? And that's it. So I hope you agree with me that Spain never left. Next. Gracias.